Thanks for joining me. This lecture topic is entitled JMeter REST API and SOAP API Testing. The Representational State Transfer, or REST, API uses the HTTP request in JMeter, and the primary methods used are GET, POST, PUT, and DELETE. Responses to these requests return status codes indicating success or failure, as well as applicable headers and JSON representing the affected fields in the message body. Both REST and SOAP are web services, but SOAP is defined as Simple Object Access Protocol. It only works with XML for response data formatting. So if you see a description for a web service online that does not use XML for the response data format, it is not SOAP. REST works with plain text, XML, HTML, and JSON formats. The most common response data format for REST is JSON. REST is a more flexible web service and in more demand today. I will proceed to describe how you can write a JMeter script for the GET and POST methods. You can do this for PUT and DELETE methods as well. Let us talk about the GET method first. Start with a JMeter template. In JMeter, for SOAP or REST requests, it is called Building a SOAP Web Service Test Plan. Why is it the same template? You need the same JMeter elements. It provides you with documentation associated with the JMeter elements in use and what to focus your attention on to develop a working solution. The next thing is complete the protocol with service name or IP, the path, and choose the GET method. For SOAP requests, the JMeter HTTP request element needs a SOAP request XML data placed in the body tab or body data tab. This looks like the data shown. It contains control data encapsulated within an envelope tag. The example shows a web service that no longer exists, but it allowed for requesting weather data by zip code. We will look at some other existing SOAP web service examples. Now, for REST services, variables may be required on the parameter tab, or the path setting should have something like this. The data after the question mark identifies keyword value pairs to define the input to the service request. It is common that an API key is supplied like the one associated with the variable key. API keys are part of the security measures associated with REST services. A primary element subordinate to the HTTP request element is the header manager. Look at the HTTP header manager element underneath the HTTP request. It should look something like what is displayed here. If the SOAP web service is version 1.0, you will need the SOAP action variable. The documentation of the web service should provide you with that information. And the content-type is usually as shown for SOAP. For REST services, it usually is text/JSON and then the character set. Again, the documentation should provide that information. Now be aware the SOAP action is not required for REST. Now in the script, Add a view results tree element as a minimum listener, and then you are ready to execute your script. Of course, if you want to see some additional test results statistics, add some other listeners that will assist you with performance data you desire to analyze. Now for the post request method. In post request, you complete both the body and the headers. You can also specify query parameters in the path field. The HTTP headers, which contain metadata, are tightly defined by the HTTP specification. They can only contain plain text and must be formatted in a certain manner. To specify headers, you will need the HTTP header manager, and the most common headers are content type and accept. Just to mention, the content type entity header field indicates the media type of the entity body sent to the recipient, while the accept entity header field can be used to specify certain media types that are acceptable for the response. This is an addition to what's in content type. Now, for example, take a look at this. Each piece of data is separated by a comma. You can use a user agent to simulate different browsers' behaviors too. The post body can be useful for the following REST requests. Let me now try to reinforce in your mind the web service concepts using JMeter by showing you a demo. We can look at examples of working REST and SOAP web services JMeter scripts. So here we are back with the JMeter IDE, and I want to demonstrate two different scripts that I created with you, one for SOAP API testing and the other for REST API testing. Now, before we do that, I want to remind you about a template that you can use, and it is called the SOAP Web Service Test Plan. When you select that one, you can use it for either type of API testing, either SOAP or with the REST API. Now, I'm going to leave that and bring up the SOAP API test. I have them created already, and here it is. Now, let me step through a couple of items with you. When you first create it from the template, of course, the template will have test plan. You give it whatever name you desire. I just chose to specify it as SOAP API. And there will be a user-defined variables element. It will have at least one item, a host variable, and you would use it to, if you were doing one particular SOAP API, then you could specify the host URL here. That's a good practice. However, in my case, I'm doing multiple, so I still did that for the first one, but it's not necessary. I could even remove it. The second thing is the default HTTP request. If you have multiple in your script, some may reference HTTP, others may reference HTTPS. So again, this may or may not be of value to you. I left the two in there. They work fine as they are, but they're not necessarily of any value. Now, I have identified 5 different requests HTTP requests for SOAP APIs. I'm going to go down the line with them, show you what is set up with them so that you get an idea of how that is done and what's important. And I also selected a couple of them that will not work, and we'll talk about that once we do the execution. Finally, we have a debug sampler. The reason I have that there is because of creating variables to capture information, and this is a good way to be able to display that at the end of the test run. We also have a view results tree listener. That's one of the most common one we use in order to see how things are processing, whether they're passing or failing, and what was actually sent and received by these requests. And then finally, an aggregate graph report. That is a nice combination to be able to see, and we'll see what that gives you. We may not have used that one before. I know we used the aggregate report, but this one is a combination of graph and report. So we'll see how that looks and the use of it. All right, let's go back to the SOAP request. I'm going to expand the first one. I called it temp convert. So this was a particular API that was supposed to provide conversion between Celsius and Fahrenheit and the other way around. In this particular one, I'm just using the one that will convert a value. You provide a Celsius number and it will respond with a Fahrenheit degree value. So here in this particular request, you will see a body of data that is provided. It's you can refer to it as in an envelope, but it is a request, an API request, SOAP API more specifically, and in it there is a place to specify a particular value. In this case, a Celsius value of 24 is specified, and we will get a result as to what is that in Fahrenheit. Excuse me. Now, we're doing a post method, and this is the path data or path portion of the URL. And here, since we already specified in the user-defined variable what the IP address is or server name, I don't have to specify it here, but I can just as easily do that, and it will work the same way, no different. When we see the rest of them, you will find that a value is there overriding what the default was. All right, one more thing here is the HTTP header manager. That, at a minimum, should specify the content type. And usually for a SOAP API, you specify something that looks like this. You're specifying the application type or MIME type, which is SOAP plus XML in this case, and the char set of UTF-8. I have two more elements that I've added to the SOAP request. One is a response assertion element, and here I'm looking for this value. If that value is there, this test will pass. If it's not, it's going to provide a message, no response. There's a boundary extractor. You've seen this one before. And what I'm doing is I provide a variable name that some value is going to be captured and placed into. And what I'm looking for in the body of the response body, I'm looking for this value. And when it finds that, then it will also look for a right boundary that looks like that. And what's in between there it's going to place that value into temp service. And we'll see that in the output. I'm also telling it, take the first iteration of that. And if it does not find these values, these boundaries, then it will respond with no response. So temp service will equal no response. All right, hopefully I explained that clear enough. The next one is a hello web service, SOAP API, that what it will do is you pass it. If we go to here, I'm sorry, I didn't click on that one. If we go here, we see a value name. We provide a name, and it will return a statement, hello, whatever name is specified. That's a simple one. Again, this is the SOAP body or data that's passed, and that request has a path of services/hello. It's a post, and this is the host URL. We're specifying HTTP in this case, not HTTPS. Some of them are such. Some use the SSL version of a URL, others do not. In this case, it does not. Then in the header manager, once again, we have the same value that we saw before on the first API. Again, it's for the variable content-type. We have a response assertion. This is what we're looking for in the output message. And if we don't get that, this message will display. Hello, web service is not responding. And then we have an extractor as well. I'm looking for this particular value and this particular value, and what's in between is what's going to be placed in this variable named hello service. Again, we're looking for the first occurrence of that, and if it doesn't find it, then we're putting the value no response in hello service. In the next SOAP API, here is the request body, excuse me, and here we specify a couple of values. One is known as the SRL file, and the second one is the request name. So here the value is shown as /xml/news.sri, and then you can specify some particular site like Yahoo, which is a news site. And what this API, of course, is supposed to do is when you specify that, it will come back with information regarding that site having to do with news information. Excuse me. In the header manager, we now see an additional variable named SOAP action. And there is some URL that's specified. This normally you would find in the documentation for that particular SOAP API. If we go back to the request body, we see that there is no 1.2. So it is defaulting to 1.0, and that's the version that requires the SOAP action. Now, moving on to past the header manager to the response assertion. In this particular case, I believe we have that on. No, it's not. Let's enable that. Okay. And it's going to look for hello. That's not what we're expecting. Let me turn that off. I did not change that one, so we will leave it as is. It wasn't necessary to put that one in. This is one of the ones that's going to fail anyway, and so we'll see how that looks, what happens. Next thing, we have this SOAP API, and it's for stock price. It's also one of the APIs that's not going to pass. It's going to fail. But here is the response information. We're specifying IBM, looking for the stock value for IBM, but it of course is not going to run successfully, and that's okay. And then the response assertion there is also disabled. Last one, this one is a calculator web service or SOAP API. And here's the response data. We're passing two values, 20 and 5. Those values will be added because it's an add web service. It has actually add, subtract, multiply, and divide. But this one is the add. And so we're sending that information, and what we get as a response is the sum total for those two numbers. Then in the HTTP header manager, because it is using version 1.0 of SOAP, then we have the SOAP action value. And that's the URL that it requires. We have a response assertion looking for this value. That's actually what's going to be calculated. 20 plus 5 is 25. We don't have to specify the value that could change. We could just specify the first part up to that value, and that would be enough to check to see if this response or if a response was valid. If not, then we'll see this message: calculator did not respond with correct data. Now, here we have a boundary extractor as well. And so we're looking for the value that's between add result and slash add result. If not, then calc service will not have that value. It will default to no response. Then again, I mentioned we have a debug sampler, and that allows us to see those variables that we created. We can then see it there in the view results tree. Under debug sampler, we'll see a body of values having to do with variables that were created during the test run. We're also going to look at the aggregate report, and of course we're going to look at the results. Let's clear and save and start this test run. Notice it's still running. We'll go and point to the results tree. So it's now trying to process the third SOAP API, which is the news API. And now we're done. Notice that 2 of them failed. Let's take a look at the 2 failure and talk just briefly about them. All right, here's the news API. We look at the response data. Well, first of all, we can see that there's an error count here, and it's telling us response code was a non-HTTP response code. So we look at the response data, and we see where there was a connection failure. And it says that as far as that URL is concerned, at that IP address, it failed to connect. Connect timed out. So that either indicates to us that the server was down or that it is not active at this time. And so I've run this several times now. I'm leaning toward that server is just not active. The web service is still in place, but the server is not active. All right, look at the second one that failed, the stock price. We'll see that what it's saying here in the message is there's a 404 not found. So it's telling us that some information it was looking for, it could not find in order to process this API. So some part of it is not there. I wanted to show you that you can get some kind of errors running these, even though these APIs are very simple. Let's look at the ones that did work. Let's start at the top with the temperature service. And this is the output that we received. And if you pan over to the right here, you'll see Celsius to Fahrenheit result 75.2. So that is the equivalent of 24 Celsius degrees, 75.2. Now, if I switch over to the Debug Sampler, I can see that value, and it's right here. So temp service is equal to 75.2. Let's go back to the request hello. So this API was supposed to come back with, we supplied it with a name, and it comes back with a value of hello, whatever name specified. If again we look and pan over to the right here, we'll see there it is, hello response message, hello John Doe. If we look at the debug sampler, we pick that value up, and there it is, hello service, hello John Doe. Excuse me again. And let's look at the last SOAP API, and here's the output, and we look at add result 25. If we look at the sampler, we picked up that value, calc service 25. So those were the ones that I was telling you about. You can use that debug sampler in order to be able to see variables that are created inside the script. They all get collected here with a debug sampler. Now, anything else I need to show you? The aggregate graph. It comes in two pieces. One, we see the actual output like we have seen in the past. I'll scroll this to the right. So we can see for the temp convert, the average, if we're looking for average response time, was about a fifth of a second. And we only ran one, so everything else is going to be the same value. The hello, 334 milliseconds. Notice the news and stock price. These are the ones that failed, news and stock price. News, it took 21 seconds before we got a response back saying that it could not connect. That's a fairly long time, but that is the reality of it. And I've run this several times, and it always comes back in 21 seconds. Then for the stock price, only 98 milliseconds transpired before it came back with an error. And then the calculator took also a fifth of a second. So these are not bad response times for the ones that did work successfully. And that's the process. It's fairly simple, nothing difficult about it. When you You've got response, or not response, you've got input data here, the body data in XML format, and you have a path value, a method value, and if it's HTTPS, you're going to put 443 for the port over here. Otherwise, for HTTP, you're just going to put in the base URL, and the rest of it is in the path, starting with /. That's enough for the SOAP API. Let's switch over to the other API, which is known as REST API. Here I only have two tests that we're running. One for an API, I'm referring to it as get people, and the other one, zip code detail. You supply a zip code and it returns some other values related to that zip code area, like what the city is, the state, the county, and what have you. Okay, so let's look a little closer at this. Here is the REST API, and again, we specify the protocol, in this case HTTPS, the actual URL, and since it's HTTPS, we specify 443 for the port, and here's the rest of the URL to get to that service, and we're doing a method called get. Now, we have no parameters to pass to it, we have no body data to pass to it. That's one of the major differences between REST and SOAP. We don't have that XML data to pass going forward. And we're coming back with JSON data when we look at the output response. So in the HTTP header manager, we're specifying just that, text/JSON. And we have a response assertion. We're looking for this value. If we don't get it, we're going to pass a message, a failure message. Retool site may not be responding. Check the response data. So these you don't have to specify, but it's nice to have some kind of information, especially if you have multiple tests in the same thread group. Now, we have a boundary extractor. We're looking for that same value we just did for the response assertion, and we're looking for a double quote, and in between that, whatever data is there, we're going to put into people service. If we don't find that, we're going to put in no data in people service. Let's look at the second API. Again, we have the URL. It's HTTPS 443 for the port. And notice in this one, not only do we have some additional URL information, but we have some data we're passing. Unlike the SOAP where we pass it in XML, here we pass it in with the URL. And so what we're passing is a key and its value, zip code and its value, and format equal JSON, because REST APIs could be in other formats as well, HTML and even XML output. But we're specifying JSON. All right, and then the HTTP header manager specifies text/JSON. Response assertion, here's what it's looking for, and if not, zipwise site may not be responding. Check the response data. We have a boundary extractor. We're looking for this value and that value on the right boundary. If we find it, we take the value that's in between and put it in zip code service. If not, we put no data in zip code service. Now here I have a JSON extractor, another element within JMeter that we may not have talked about in detail. And here is how it works. You specify one or more variables separated by a semicolon. So I give them a name. I'm wanting to pick up the zip code, the city, and the county. And then the JSON path expression is like this. I first have to see what the output is, and then I would know what the values are that I can use. And so in this case, the entire JSON output starts with results. So then the format is results dot zip is the first major piece of data, or the first occurrence of data in that output. And then I can specify, so that will get me the zip code and put it in zip. Then $.results is another way to specify that. I can just specify results or $.results. Either format is accepted. And then .cities is the next level of occurrence, of occurring values, if you will, in that results output. And so I'm telling it to look at cities, and I want every occurrence of city. So look in cities and find every occurrence of city and put that in city, the variable. And then the last piece of information I want is results.county. Now, you have to read up on JSON referencing, data referencing, in order to understand this more. But there's another format that's used where you use slashes. Here we're using a dot separator. And so results county, or results.county, will pick up the county value and put it into this variable. Here I'm telling it to use all that it finds for each of these occurrences. So there's 3 of them here. I have to match that. Either have nothing there or I have to match it with something. Then finally, in the default values, I have to take the same approach, and that is, what do I want in these variables if it doesn't find what I'm looking for? And it will easily put in zip equals 0, city equals 0, county equals 0 if it doesn't find any information. So the debug sampler is there again. We will see this output in there. And we have the view results tree. We have the aggregate graph. I'm going to clear and save and then run. And there we are. That was pretty quick. We could look at the aggregate graph and see they ran very quickly. Here's the 2. Get people in zip code detail, and zip code detail sends back more information, and yet you can see what the timings are here. Now we can also see a graph that shows us the first API test and the second one, and the difference in the response time. Let's go back to the view results tree and let's look at what was sent back. In the case of the first one, where we wanted to get people, it brings back 3 pieces of information: an ID value, the name of ID1, and its rating false. So we got a name back. Then in the second API. Here is what I was talking about. We've got these results data, and it's in a JSON format. And so we have a way with the JSON Extractor to pull this information out. Or I could have just used the boundary extractor and just pull everything that's in between results and these squiggly brackets, and it would just put all of that in a single variable. But I wanted to show you how to separate it, parse it out. All right, so let's look at that output. In the Debug Sampler, here we see, and what it did was it took my variable and added a value behind it so I'd know what occurrence that was. So there are 2 towns that are in this one zip code. The zip code is 77373, and so there's a town called Spring and a town called Rayford in that zip code. The county is Harris County. Anything else? Nope, that's it. That's all we wanted to, oh, I'm sorry, People Service right here. Bernadette or Benedetta Louch. Hopefully I'm not destroying that name pronunciation. Okay, so that's an example of running a REST API test versus running a SOAP API test. They're just slightly different, and they have, you know that we found out that the REST APIs seem to be becoming more popular than the SOAP API. I believe I'm done here. Thank you for your time. My time has ended for this session. I thank you for yours.